In this short talk, I would like to share a reflection on the transformation of the disciples of Jesus from complete failure at the Passion and Crucifixion to complete confidence and boldness after Pentecost. This change is dramatic and total. It is like a second conversion or being born again. In the scriptures, this journey takes place over 50 days, the 50 days between the resurrection appearances and the Feast of Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit on the disciples, after the definitive departure of Jesus at the Ascension. I would like to suggest that this dramatic journey of transformation over 50 days in the hearts of the disciples has a parallel in the modern 12-step recovery process experienced by so many people overcoming addiction of different types. I will try to draw out these parallels as we move along. The disciples abandoned Jesus at the Passion, so not only were all their hopes and dreams shattered, but they experienced personal failure and shame of the most painful kind. They had let down a good person whom they loved. They realized that they cannot undo the harm that they have done. In this sense, they are powerless. Not only that, they are being hunted by extremists so that their lives have become unmanageable. Worse, some of their number are saying that they have seen the Lord like a ghost, so perhaps the whole group is becoming insane. There are plenty of examples of powerlessness in the Bible. I would like just to take 4 short examples to draw out the importance of recognizing our personal powerlessness before God and others. The first story concerns Naaman, the Syrian military commander who contracts leprosy. This story is from chapter 5 in the 2nd book of Kings in the Old Testament. This leprosy will destroy Naaman's body, his life, reputation and relationships. He cannot find a cure in his own land. However, a young Hebrew slave girl in his house tells Naaman's wife about the prophet Elisha in Israel. Elisha has the power from God to heal leprosy. Naaman takes his first step towards recovery by listening to his wife and the slave girl. He no longer knows best. He must take advice from the women in his family who love him. He takes this advice and travels to Israel. He creates a diplomatic incident with the Hebrew king, but he eventually finds his way to Elisha's house. Elisha declines to come out to meet him, but tells him to go bathe in the river Jordan 7 times. Naaman is furious and refuses to go. He feels insulted. He expected Elisha to perform some elaborate ceremony for all to see. Naaman is still attached to his own ego. His servants plead with him to do what the prophet Elisha has said. For the 2nd time, Naaman listens to his inferiors. He bathes in the Jordan 7 times and is cured. He recognizes that it is the God of Israel who has healed him. What is really important in this story, it seems to me, is the way Naaman listens to the Hebrew slave girl and his servants. They know that there is a solution for Naaman's leprosy, even if Naaman is reluctant to believe it. Once he does what they say, he finds healing. To go back to the resurrection, the disciples were slow to believe Mary of Magdala when she announced to them, "I have seen the Lord." Once they began to believe, their fear and shame fell away. Hope and courage returned. The second biblical story about powerlessness that I would like to reflect on is the case of the paralytic lowered through the roof. Mark includes this story in his Gospel at chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. It must have taken at least 4 men, if not more, to raise the stretcher up onto the roof and then lower it down into the room where Jesus was teaching. The paralytic's friends and family must have loved him to go to so much trouble to help him. This is the only Gospel story where healing and the forgiveness of sins are explicitly linked. In fact, at first Jesus speaks to the paralyzed man about his sins. In one sense, people could say, How could he sin if he is paralysed? But in fact, Jesus is relating to him as a normal human being, which of course he is. The paralysis is just a condition of his life. It does not determine who he is. Powerlessness, fear and shame do not determine who we are. Once the man is healed, Jesus tells him to take his mat and go home. In other words, he walks away a new man, healed, but he carries his former condition with him, so to speak. It has become part of his story. The third biblical story about powerlessness that I would like to reflect on is the story of the old woman with the incurable blood disease. Mark includes this story in his Gospel at chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. This old woman is so ashamed of her illness that she just touches the hem of Jesus' cloak so that she can be healed anonymously. This is perhaps the only Gospel story where Jesus heals someone despite himself. He has to stop the disciples and do a search until they find the woman. The old woman explains herself and describes the debilitating illness and the length of time that she has endured it. She is open with the Lord about it. Her powerlessness, shame and fear have been replaced by confidence and serenity. She has been healed already. The fourth and final biblical story about powerlessness that I would like to reflect on is Paul's description of his own inner struggle in Romans chapter 7, verses 15 and following. Paul says, "I cannot understand my own behaviour. I fail to carry out the things I want to do, and I find myself doing the very things that I hate." Here Paul recognizes that his diseased attitudes and behaviour patterns of the past remain operative even after he has experienced radical conversion. It takes a long time for real change to take place in us at the deepest part of our beings. By leading with his weakness, Paul is inviting us all to be patient with ourselves during the transformation process. There is no need to become downhearted when we notice our old attitudes and behaviours returning for a brief visit. We hand them back to the Lord, confess our weakness and powerlessness, and move on forward to serenity and to holiness. These 4 short Bible reflections on Naaman the Syrian, the paralytic lowered through the roof, the woman with the incurable blood disease, and Paul's inner struggle show us that a first step on the journey towards inner healing and recovery is to admit that we do not possess the power to transform ourselves or our situation, but that God does. God often speaks through those who love us. We need to listen to them, admit our powerlessness, and invite God into our hearts to do the heavy lifting of transformation, so to speak. We rely on God's power, not our own. We await the coming of the Holy Spirit into our spirit. In this way, we share our hope, joy and strength with our fellow travellers.